This is a little video on Vera Baird. If you don't know who Vera Baird is, tell them who you are, Vera.
Then I'm the Police and Crime Commissioner for Northumbria. That means that I am elected to be the people's representative in the police force. I am there to make sure that the police deliver the priorities of the public, and I'm able to do that because I have the police budget to use as leverage. Of course, that requires me to find out what the public's priorities were.
Can you guess what they were? I think the public's priorities were in what they required the police. Okay, I'll give you a few minutes to think about it. Okay, time up. All right, let's see what she says.
And so I did so when I was elected just less than 2 years ago, and they included, not surprisingly, cutting crime.
Did you guess it? They wanted the crime to be cut.
So clearly, insofar as there are things that can be achieved to cut the crime committed by women, there is a very direct interest from me.
Oh, this is good, isn't it? Because she's going to be serious about crimes committed by women. We know that women benefit from benevolent sexism in the legal system. They're less likely to be charged, less likely to be found guilty, and if they are found guilty, they're likely to get shorter sentences. So there is some serious inequalities there. I wonder what she's going to say.
However, the job is not just to have that role with policing, making sure they do what the public want. It has some other dimensions. So I must work by statute with the community safety partnerships, trying to stop crime from happening in the first place.
Oh yeah, prevention's better than the cure.
So supporting them in youth diversion schemes, that kind of thing. And at, as it were, the other end, I have a role to work with the criminal justice agencies to produce an efficient and effective criminal justice system. Consequently, I have an interest really in crime from the start, trying to stop it happening, all the way through policing if it does happen, into the opportunity to influence the criminal justice process at the end.
Wow, that's quite a bit of power, isn't it? She gets to influence the whole process all the way through to the criminal justice end.
I have a particular interest, which is pretty well known, in dealing with violence against women and girls.
Which is an interesting specialism when you think about it, because it used to be women and children, didn't it? It used to be women and children first, and that sort of thing. And it used to be because they were seen as vulnerable. Women are seen as vulnerable because that was part of the whole gender dichotomy, that they were the more precious sex, the more fragile sex, and also the potential to give birth to children. And that's why we worried a bit more about women than we did about men. And children, because they're all potential people. They all grow up to be somebody. It's tragic when a child dies because they're a child. They haven't achieved their potential yet. So women and children sort of made some sort of sense. But now it's women and girls. So it's as if males become disposable much younger these days than they used to.
And we have a regional strategy on that theme with the two other police and crime commissioners in NEPAC's area, who are Ron Hogg in Durham and Barry Coppinger in Cleveland. We spent yesterday celebrating the first year of that violence against women and girls strategy, and we think we are making real progress. The significance of that I'll come back to in a few minutes.
Yeah, good. Come back to it in a few minutes, because I think you were getting off topic there. Can you really tell us what you were going to do about crimes committed by women?
Obviously, if one of my priorities, because it's the public's, is cutting crime, I am to some extent a hostage to what the probation service can do to try to cut re-offending, and here in this topic about women. And I raise the concerns that I think are in your preliminary papers about the wisdom of the government's changes to the probation service. Northumbria Probation Trust was great, actually. It exceeded expectation every year, and although there is recidivism, nonetheless they were excellent, and it is a shame that they have now been divided up into two and they will be sold off to Sodexo sometime, I think, in the new year. And we have to hope that that under 1 year sentence cohort, which is coming into aftercare for the first time, as I'm sure you know, That is a very good thing, and I cannot think of better people to have supported those 1 year and under cohort when they left custody than Northumberland Probation Trust. So I think that idea is fine, but I am concerned about the change otherwise. Tracking back, I was a criminal QC for many years, and I defended by and large, and I defended obviously a number of women, though 90% of crime is committed by men.
Obviously.
They tended to be three kinds of women that I dealt with. One was those, and I guess you'll hear about this from a later speaker, those who had effectively been pressured into crime by a male partner.
Oh dear, okay. Really? So, the first group she's going to talk about there are women that have been pressured into crime by a male partner. Now I'm going to talk about the dual pedestalization of the genders, which is that women are all good but helpless, and men are all powerful but not good. And we can continue to believe that women are all good because of their helplessness. We can continue to believe that men are all powerful because we know they're not good. Therefore, if a woman is no longer on her pedestal of all goodness, it must have been because she was dragged off by one of those powerful men.
In particular, I was involved in a lot of cases arising out of the gangland activities in Moss Side in Manchester some years ago, and there young women would frequently be arrested for possessing the most appalling weapons, which their boyfriends had hid in the airing cupboard or sometimes in the kids' cot, and left them responsible.
Such a shame. How did these perfectly nice girls wind up with such terrible men? I understand.
I did once run a trial in which a young woman had been pressed by her boyfriend enormously to support him in a program of frankly grooming youngsters to supply them to businessmen for sex. She, with my support and help, ran the defence of duress, that she had been put under sufficient pressure by him to have lost her will to resist, and she was in fact acquitted.
I'm not sure when she says youngsters, does she mean children, or does she just mean young women, or even young men? She doesn't really make clear. Youngsters. So if it's young adults or children is not clear. But yeah, she managed to clear that particular pimp's name by saying that she was coerced into it by her boyfriend. Well done. Well done. So he managed to exonerate her from the crime of pimping by blaming it all on her boyfriend. Well done, Vera. Well done for bringing back the law of coverture. You are so progressive.
The third kind of women I defended then.
Now you'd think, because you said there's three types, right? And then she said the first type, the ones that have been pressured into it by the boyfriend, and now she's saying the third type, you'd think that I've edited a bit out. I haven't. She forgets to talk about the second type. We don't know what the second type are. I'm thinking, from what she says later, she means those with mental illness, because she kind of talks about women with mental illness later, but she seems to have forgotten to put the second one in this list of three.
Was what we called in those days battered women who'd killed their violent partners. That is to say, women who'd suffered domestic violence for a very long time. He came in for one further attack. It looked terrifying, and she would seize a knife in the kitchen where she'd fled from him and strike out once, killing him. There were not that many of those, of course. Far more perpetrators of domestic violence kill their partners, but that movement of women who responded in that way met with very poor responses from the criminal justice system.
Yeah, because I suppose the sort of like received wisdom is that somebody killing somebody like that is actually a murderer. It's interesting there, as she says, it's normally the perpetrator that winds up killing the victim. how do you know it wasn't that way round? I mean, the primary witness that's going to tell you otherwise is dead, aren't they? There are a couple of reports that you can check out of women that were got off murder cases by Vera's work. Might find out some of those later.
And we had a lot of work to do to change the law, which Labour ultimately did when we were in government, to make the defences fairer for somebody in that position.
One of them I found, the defendant had shot her husband while he was asleep in bed, and she still managed to get off as self-defense because she claimed there'd been a history of abuse. But he was asleep in bed and she shot him. Surely she could just left, couldn't she? I mean, how can shooting somebody when they're asleep in bed be a better form of self-defense than just leaving the house? Of course, there's no refuges for them to go to, is there? You know, they haven't got the luxury that men have of having tons of refuges to go off to. Jesus, it's not like there's no help available, is it? I mean, women like Vera, I say women like Vera, make sure there's loads of refuges. Having said that, she's just got rid of victim support and replaced it with her own charity, so we don't know how well that one does. But generally there are refuges for domestic violence victims everywhere. It's not like they don't know where to turn. There are lots of places to turn. And he's asleep in bed. Shouldn't be that difficult to leave the house.
So that's my experience, as it were, of women in court when I was a barrister. But by 2001, I had changed career and was the Member of Parliament for Redcar, and it's at that stage probably that I'd come closest to your agenda, because I was asked to run something called the Fawcett Commission on Women and the Criminal Justice System, set up to investigate how the criminal justice system dealt with victims, with defendants, and also, though we needn't pursue it today, with workers in the criminal justice system. And there, I think, is when I first saw something that was, for me, quite a breakthrough. We obviously broke down our workload into victims and defendants in order to try to accumulate evidence on which to form views. Our defendants were largely in custody or on community programmes for quite minor charges, not serious stuff at all.
Do you remember the two people she's talked about so far? Oh, no, great. She talked about the girls with dangerous weapons. Okay, that's a minor offence. I suppose having a dangerous weapon is a minor offence. She talked about a girl that was a pimp and potentially a paedophilic pimp. That's the interpretation of what she's saying that I'm being led to believe she's talking about. Somebody who is in the child prostitution racket. And the third group she talked about were all murderers. Now, I'm not saying that the group of defendants she's talking to now are in those categories, but I'm just saying they clearly are non-minor offences that women are involved in. But it's quite possible that the majority of the people she's talking about are minor offences. And then she looked at the male criminal population, because you'll find the same thing there. You'll find there's people that are there for drug possession, or drug dealing, or petty theft. And they're not all going to be serial killers, are they? I don't know what she has not classifying what a minor crime is, but you do get the impression she's underplaying it simply because they're women. And with reference to my previous video, bear in mind, this is a woman that wants sex on a drunken night out to be treated as though it were rape. So is sex on a drunken night out a minor crime? Because it is, after all, only drunken casual sex, or is it a major crime because it is, after all, rape? It's a problem. given a minor crime the name of a major crime. That makes it rather confusing as to whether we're dealing with a minor or a major crime, isn't it?
Our victims were almost exclusively victims of domestic violence and of sexual abuse. We would put out a bid for evidence. We had to tune our channels to try and hit the right people. When we put out a bid for victims who were women to come forward and talk about their experiences in the criminal justice system, we got only people who wanted to talk about rape and domestic violence. So we put out a fresh bid for evidence saying, please tell us about your experiences as victims in the criminal justice system in other kinds of field. But we got absolutely no response, which either means that the criminal justice system, which I doubt was dealing perfectly with the victims of burglary who were females, for instance, or it meant that everybody who'd had contact with the criminal justice system was worried about the way in which domestic violence and sexual abuse had been dealt with. Very interestingly, we then looked at the conclusions we were to draw for this, and we moved to considering female defendants. And we found that they were, as I've said, largely in custody for relatively small offences. Something like 70% were for non-violent offences. Most were in for less than a year, and that was where the repeat offending took place. People who were in custody for less than a year. Importantly, we found out that about 70% of women in custody had 2 or more mental health issues.
Yeah, I told you mental health issues were going to come up. I think about mental health issues, maybe we'll look at the DSM. Practically everyone's got a mental health issue. It's just a finding out which mental health issue you have. And then the difficult bit is actually sifting which of the 5 or 6 mental health issues that seem to fit you perfectly it is that you've got, because most of them say, you know, we'll have 3 or more of these symptoms, and they got a list of loads of symptoms. That's a really inexact science, psychology. Anyway, now the fact of the matter is that if you're doing criminal behaviour, that's one of them already. One of the symptoms you got there, reckless behaviour. That's one of the symptoms of various disorders in the DSM. You'd be hard pressed to find somebody who is a criminal who hasn't got a mental disorder, because actually, in many ways, being a criminal is a sign that you have a mental disorder.
And either drug or alcohol abuse. Many had had early lives in care, but here was the very fascinating and sad fact, which was that about 50% had suffered from violence at home and about a third had been sexually assaulted. If you look at the usual figures that 1 in 4 women in society suffer from violence at home, you can see that they had exactly twice the frequency of it.
Which means they have come from communities that have a lot of criminal activity in. It's not really that much of a surprise. The people that are criminals come from communities that have criminals in. So yes, they are going to have a higher chance of experiencing some sort of violence, possibly even sexual assault. But she's going to imply this is the cause, isn't she? You know she is. You know she's doing that correlation equals causation thing. You just know it's going to happen. I can't even remember how this turns out, but I've already decided that's what's going to happen.
And they had twice the frequency too of sexual abuse. And so we sat back and we thought about the 2 pieces of work we'd done, and we concluded that when we considered victims of crime who largely had suffered from domestic or sexual abuse, and when we considered defendants in crime who largely had been thrown into chaos by their experiences of sexual and domestic abuse, that actually we were talking about the same people.
No suggestion that you've done any research that is similar with male convicts. I mean, I think you'd probably find the same finding, because I think male criminals also come from communities that have a lot of criminals in. Very, very likely that a high percentage of the male criminal population experience some sort of violence at home, and very likely that they experience some sort of violence in their community. In fact, I don't think there's a man alive that hasn't experienced some sort of violence at some point in his life.
There was a dramatic breakthrough for me, and it's an important understanding that has carried with me ever since. As Fawcett's commission started to produce its results, there was a vast increase noted in women in custody. I think it increased between 1995 and 2005 by 69%. The figures were then that 85,000 males and 4,000 females approximately were in custody, so always a tiny, tiny part of that population were women, and of course that meant they got very little attention.
You're saying, oh, it's a shame there's so few women in prison because it means they don't get the attention as a group. Well, you know what to do then. You need to get more women in prisons. If you got more women in prisons, they'd probably get more attention. So what we need is some sort of campaign to get more women in prison. Is that what you're saying, Vera? I've got a funny suspicion that isn't what she's saying.
I looked up the figures yesterday, and it is now 88,000 males and 3,943 females in custody. Plus ça change.
I can't make out what she said there. Did she say 80,000 men or 88,000 men? Enunciation. I know I'm not one that can talk about enunciation because my enunciation is a bit poor sometimes. But I'm not sure if she said 88,000 or 80,000. If she said 88,000, that's an increase of 3,000. That would be the inequality between men and women in prison actually increasing. That's supposed to be positive. Also, if there are more men in prison, if the majority of people in custody is men, surely that's the bigger problem. Why are you concentrating on what is the smallest problem?
However, the most important thing was that there was then a spate of suicides at Styal prison, whilst Fawcett was reporting.
The spate of suicides at Styal prison was 6 inmates in the space of a year, which was quite an unprecedentedly high figure. It was a bit of a spike. But actually, in the last year, Styal prison didn't have any suicides. Would you like to hear which prisons did? Woodhill prison, a men's prison, had 5 suicides. Exeter prison had 4. Men's prison. Ranby, a men's prison, had 4. Winchester, a men's prison, had 4. Bullingdon, a men's prison, had 3. Chelmsford, a men's prison, had 3. Foston Hall, a women's prison, also had 3. Hull, a men's prison, had 3. Hull, a men's prison, had 3. Wandsworth, a men's prison, had 3. Bristol, a men's prison, had 2. Durham, men's prison, 2. Glenparva, men's prison, 2. Guys Marsh, men's prison, 2. Leeds, Lincoln, Liverpool, Mount, Norwich, and Pentonville, all men's prisons, had 2 suicides each. Bedford, Belmarsh, Birmingham, and Brinsford, they all men's prisons, they had 1. Bronzefield is a women's prison, that had 1. Cardiff, Dartmoor, Doncaster, Dovegate, Earlstoke, Forest Bank, Full Sutton, Garth, Gartree, Grendon, Highdown, Home House, Leicester, Long Larton, all men's prisons, they had 1 each. Low Newton, a women's prison, there were 1. Maidstone, Northumberland, Onley, Peterborough, Rochester, Sheppey, Stocken, Stoke Heath, Swansea, Swinton Hall, Thameside, Verne, Wealdstone, and Wormwood Scrubs, all men's prisons, had 1 each. In total, 5 female suicides out of 89. It's proportional. As we said, 5% of prison inmates are women, and 5% of prison suicides were women. There's nothing particularly gendered about prison suicides. Well, I can't leave it there, can I? I've just said there's nothing gendered about prison suicide. But there is something gendered about suicide. We know that men are more likely to commit suicide than women. And we know that men are 4 to 5 times more likely to commit suicide than women. And yet when it comes to the prison population, there's nothing gendered about it at all. So when the situation's the same, the suicides equal out. So that means, that would suggest there is something situational about the male suicide rate rather than something innately male. That just hit me, and I'm putting that out there. That's for discussion. But that would suggest, wouldn't it, there is something about suicide that is situational rather than innately male. Just think about that. It's not the only possible explanation. I'm aware of that. Sorry, I'm a psychologist. I can't do this. I can't do this thing where, you know, the internet is full of people that go, I know everything. And I can't do that. I'm not that kind of person. This is why I have that little disclaimer at the end. Because there's 3 types of people in the world that know everything, right? And they are dogmatists who know everything because somebody else has told them. And usually a holy book or a guru or their women's studies tutor. Not casting any aspersions in any particular groups there. Secondly, there are people that are mad, and the conspiracy theorists, tin hats conspiracy theorists, and they think they've all worked it out, and they're the only ones that know. And they've got to explain to you. These 2 groups of people know everything, so you got your sort of like dogmatists, loonies, and thirdly charlatans who don't actually know everything. They just pretending they do because they want you to think they do. I can't be like that. I'm not that sort of person. I'm a doubter. So I'm going to say one proviso is it could feasibly be whatever gives you the predisposition to be criminal also gives you a predisposition to commit suicide. So it could be, in fact, it's just, it doesn't necessarily mean it's situational. That is only a possible interpretation. I'm still putting it out there for discussion. I just want you to be aware it's not the only possible interpretation. I've got to be honest, haven't I? Saying it's something about so this is our discussion section of a psychology paper. You know, a discussion section of a psychology paper. This needs further research. Yeah, this needs further research. If there is something about criminality and something about predisposition to suicide that correlates, that could be developmental. That could be a difference in life experiences. It could be the same life experiences that lead to criminality and the life experiences that lead to suicide are the same. So, either way, that's not innate either. So, yeah, a lot of area for discussion here. But it does suggest that when women are put in a masculine situation, whether that is in terms of their life experiences or whether that is in terms of their current situation, then the suicide rates equal out. Possibly.
And I had some contact with Fiona McTaggart, then a Minister of State at the Home Office, who wanted to look into the whole state of women in prison. And between us, we came up with the perfect chair for that inquiry, who was Jean Causton, now Baroness Causton, who sadly can't be here today, but who still remains a terrific force for women and imprisonment. The contents of her report reflected, although in a good deal more depth and with a good deal more full recommendations, pretty well what we had found as Fawcett. She found further that about 2/3 of women in custody were mothers. Quite a lot of them will have lost the care of their children.
They've lost the care of their children. It's a very strange way of putting it, really. You'd thought the children had lost the care of their mother, not the mother's lost the care of the children. You'd think that the argument would be, oh, well, the children have lost a parent. And yeah, they have. And lots of children lose fathers through the prison service as well. So just looking at those stats there, look, in 2003, 25% of young men in the general population were fathers, but in the prison population, 32% were fathers, which means that there was a higher percentage of fathers in the prison population than there was in the general population. That apparently isn't as bad. It's not as bad to lose your father to the prison system as it is to lose your mother to the prison system, apparently. It's only possible to think that this is not as bad by devaluing fathers. Presumably there will be other carers to step in for the children. They're not going to leave the children without carers. It doesn't matter. Whichever parent it is, the child has lost a parent, and somebody is going to have to pick that up and take on that role one way or the other, whether it's a father or a mother. And I think that's what's so key about the phrase he's using. They've lost the care of their children. It's not about what the children have lost. It's about what the mother has lost. It's a plea for sympathy, but specifically for women. It's odd because this woman's a radical feminist. If she's a radical feminist, surely she should be against the whole idea that a woman's role in life is to produce children and then to nurture them. And yet she's reinforcing that when it gives her advantage in asking for special considerations made for women. She's prepared to go back to a Victorian ideal of womanhood when it gets women special privileges.
About 85% of all the children all the women in custody had children. About 18,000 children a year were separated from their mother and often had to move home and therefore school because their mothers were in prison. She found, as we had, that most of the sentences were small. If the idea of prison is to protect you and me against violent offenders, that wasn't being used appropriately.
Right, the sentences were small. That's the complaint we made now. It's hardly worth doing. If you're not going to put them in for a long time, it's hardly worth doing. We know that women get shorter sentences than men. But she's kind of using that as an argument for why they shouldn't go to prison. Saying, well, it's not doing much good, is it? If we're trying to keep them off the streets, it's not doing much good. Well, yeah. Why have women got shorter prison sentences than men?
It was largely dishonesty. It was mostly chaotic dishonesty and other kinds of small offences that mounted up until ultimately the magistrates, to be totally fair to them, could not think what else to do. And sometimes, as Jean found, sent people to prison for their own good. Of course, that doesn't work. If you're already suffering from the kind of multiple traumas that I've set out are common in this population.
She's specialised in trying to work out what causes it of a woman. When a woman commits a crime, she spent all her time going back for her history, finding out what caused it. What caused it? Why would you, of all people, be committing a crime? Either somebody has pressured you into it, probably your boyfriend, or you must have some kind of mental illness, because I imagine that's what the second group is that she didn't list. Or you must have suffered some kind of abuse that's drove you to it. She's taken all that time. She's specialised. She makes it quite clear she specialises in women and girls. So she's never taken that time to work out what it is that makes a male criminal criminal. Maybe she'd find the same sort of answers. Maybe she'd find that if we looked into the history of all criminals, we'd find that at some point in their life they'd been abused, or they suffered some kind of mental illness, or they've been pressured by a third party. There's always a reason for everything happening. As I said, one thing leads to another. It's cause and effect, isn't it? There's always cause and effect. There's always something that caused what is happening now to happen in the past. So you can find that for anyone. You could find the person that pressured them into it. You could find the form of abuse that was the provocation. And if you can't get them to fit into one of those two categories, you always have that third, which is mental illness. and you can pretty much always find a mental illness. I do have something to add to this. So I was saying that you could probably find it. If you look really hard, you'll find the person that either coerced them into doing it or pressured them into doing the crime, or you could find the person that abused them, or you could find the mental illness. But bear in mind, this woman's also in favour of expanding the definitions of what abuse can be. To her, it needn't be violence. Well, actually, she'll still use the word violence, because this is one of the things that feminists do in terms of perversion of the language. The violence needn't be physical violence, that it can be emotional violence, and that sort of thing. Controlling behaviours can be described as a form of violence. The abuse of the word violence is itself a violent act to the English language, if you ask me. So she makes it even easier to find the excuse for a crime. I say the excuse. There's a difference between an excuse and a reason. The thing is, finding a reason doesn't mean you've found an excuse. An excuse is a reason that takes your culpability away. And just because you've found a reason does not mean that you have removed culpability. You can still be responsible for your actions, even though you know that there were stimuli and developmental factors that cause those behaviours to come about. Ultimately, we're all still responsible for our behaviours. So finding a reason isn't finding an excuse. But if that's the way you're approaching it, and looking for a reason so you can use it as an excuse, not only will you always find one, but also she's expanding the definitions of what those reasons can be by expanding the definition of abuse.
And then on top of that, you're put into custody for just long enough to wreck your home life and get your children taken away.
It's funny, isn't it? When fathers are deprived of seeing their children, it's kind of assumed, oh, yeah, but what if he's abusive? Well, he's abusive. Maybe it's better for the children not to see him because he might be abusive. And this is just when we're talking about divorces. The reason that there is such reluctance to have shared custody is it might put children in the hands of abusive fathers. Here we're talking about women that are criminals. We're not talking about women they're not in jail because they've had a divorce. They're in jail because they're criminals, right? And we're really worried that children are being put into care and taken away from their mothers. And it's not considered for a moment. You might be taking the children from abuse. For all we know, obviously not in all the cases. Some of the cases they might be very good mothers. But in some of those cases, it's not egalitarian, is it? Different attitude we have when a father's deprived of seeing his children. We go, oh yeah, but what if he's abusive? It's the first thing, isn't it? It's the first thought that goes through their heads is, yeah, but what if he's abusive? Maybe it's protecting children. Maybe it's better the children don't see him. And now we're talking about women that have actually have some evidence of criminality because they've got enough evidence of criminality to be put in prison. And we're not worried about the fact that we might be exposing children to abusive parents. We're just, oh my God, they're deprived of their mother.
Probably for you to lose your tenancy, and yet it isn't long enough for you to get onto any anti-addictive treatment or any rehabilitative treatment. Then all the prison has done is make your situation 10 times worse.
I think it's another argument for longer sentences. Vera, I'm right behind you. Longer sentences for women, now. She's not making that argument, is she? She could be making that argument. She's not making that argument. Yeah, if you have longer sentences, you'd be able to rehabilitate them off drugs and stuff. But it's just not long enough to work with, is it?
And that was the very clear conclusion that Jean came to, and that therefore you should look better at community programmes. I do not think anything has changed in that recommendation. Now, we made some progress with the implementation of Jean Corsten's recommendations. I was, as a minister, which I became in 2006 in the Ministry of Justice, on the Corsten committee which tried to drive that agenda, and I stayed on when I became Solicitor General in 2007, and certainly we stopped strip searching, we improved prison conditions. There was never much progress to be made with the prison estate about having small prisons locally, which had been one of her key recommendations, so that women didn't have to do what they still have, which is being hugely separated from their families, because the very few women's prisons there are mean that they tend to be a long way away unless chance plays a role from where they live.
I don't have a problem with the idea of there being more women prisons that are just smaller for that very reason, that they are then close to their communities. That actually seems quite a sensible policy, which I'm not going to mock with a bit of snark, because I think actually it's quite a reasonable idea if there's a budget for it. There you go, I'm a reasonable man, look.
I should just in passing mention remand, which Jean Corsten found was another mischief. Remand relatively short and often followed by sentencing which wasn't custodial, and nonetheless playing the same role of separating women from their families. And so I hope, and I do believe, that we have got better at that. Women used to be remanded in custody, for instance, for psychiatric reports. So no real evidence that they needed psychiatric assistance, but keeping them still, the courts would think, long enough to investigate that point which had been raised, seemed to me to be the ultimate cruelty, and we now do that at least very differently. So let's look though at the alternatives, because a problem about women's community sentences has always been that small number of women who are in the criminal justice system in the first place, so that they have tended not to have the focus and the attention. Look back again to the things I described, the multiple needs that those women have, and how complex therefore their cases were, how complex a set of programs and the set of inputs they are likely to need in order to be rehabilitated in the community, and the lack of likelihood of application being put into that when the overwhelming number of repeat criminals are men.
It's funny, the other day when I was talking in previous video, I was saying failure is a men's issue. Because the thing about failure is a men's issue, I was saying, well, it's because we see ourselves as individuals that we don't have a sort of collective consciousness, that we don't class consciousness. So we don't feel our problems are problems that are shared. We see them as problems that we all have to ourselves. So the fact that our problems may be to do with a larger economic situation is not something that we feel that we're sharing. We take all the burden and responsibility of it to ourselves. But shifting between the individualistic view and the collective view, they're two different ways of looking at the world. I don't think either of them are particularly holistic, because in some sense we are all part of a collective, we are all part of society, and we're also all individuals. One can shuttle between these two ways of looking at the world. If you tend to look at us as part of a collective most of the time, then you tend to be on the left. And if you tend to look at us as individuals most of the time, you tend to be on the right. Politically, particularly with the politics as it is at the moment, where the right tends to be sort of libertarian and the left tends to be kind of state-focused. That isn't. Anyhow, so what I was going to come down to here is women are a minority in prison. This is what she's saying. She's saying because women are a minority in prisons, they don't get the focus. But every individual in prison is a minority. They're a minority of one. And that's the thing. You've got a very large population in prison. That minority of one doesn't get the focus they need, right? When you're talking about criminals, it's not. Is it really useful to talk collectively there? Is it useful to talk collectively of women in prisons? Should we be looking at every prisoner as an individual? And as individuals, they're all a tiny minority because the prison population as a whole, is so large. So because the prison population is so large, or because the population of people in the criminal justice system is so large, all of those individuals don't get the care they need in terms of being focused on the individual and working out what are the underlying causes for their criminality and what measures can be taken to reduce the chance of recidivism and to rehabilitate them into the community. Right? They all suffer from being a minority. And she's sort of saying that women, because their demographic is a minority, the individuals within that population need to have all that focus. Whereas men, who are a majority, right, don't need to have that focus as individuals. As individuals, we're all minorities. We're a minority of one, aren't we? So just to make it clear, you wouldn't put a collection of people, you wouldn't put a whole collective of one demographic into a therapy office to work out what their problems are, to get to talk about their problems. Try and work out what it is about their behaviours that's causing. You couldn't do that. You can't provide therapy for a whole collective and be client-centred at the same time as a therapist, right? You have to be centred on that one person. So it's rather strange to be claiming, oh, because they're a minority, they need more attention. No, because as individuals, which is what is relevant here, the person as an individual, we're talking about rehabilitation and reducing recidivism and trying to work out the underlying causes of the criminality. They're all individuals because they're all different. She's using a collective argument in a situation where collectivism isn't the relevant tool for problem solving.
That is a dilemma. I cannot see the dilemma being improved by payment by results.
Yeah, payment by results is a very Blairite idea, but then Cameron's a Blairite and Theresa May has inherited a Cameron policy there, which is very Blair inspired, which is the idea that, you know, everyone's got to be incentivized to do something. It's going to be incentivized in some sort of financial way, otherwise you won't get results. No one ever does a job because they actually care about the job they do. So the idea is to incentivize the probation services to produce better results. So probation services get more money if they produce the correct outcome. That's really stupid. Really stupid. But it's trying to apply free market economics to the state sector as part of the sort of Blairite anti-socialism. God, I hate Blair.
A component, at least in the new probation arrangements. I attended a stakeholder meeting in connection with the bidders for this process of privatising the community rehabilitation company, which is what the low-risk half of the probation service here is now called. And in that stakeholder group, we were asked to recommend the kinds of prisoners and the kinds of criminal defendants who should be given priority by the supplier of probation services. And I mentioned women, and I also mentioned people who've got alcohol problems, veterans, and a range of other people. And the response from one of the leaders of one of the bidders was that there's just no volume in any of those cases, so that you can do a standard package for a defendant and justify your payment by results by volume passing through. Well, that cannot, of course, possibly apply to women.
Yeah, she's identified actually a very genuine problem with the profit motive in certain state sectors. Whereas if you are being efficient, you're not necessarily providing the best care to the individuals, particularly individuals that are special cases, because you it's more efficient to have a one-size-fits-all solution, because then you just whip it out. It's like everyone on the conveyor belt. That's what efficiency is all about, isn't it? Efficiency is all about treating everyone the same. Quite ironic, actually, when you think about it. When you think about what's assumed. I was talking about this, that actually I was saying that there is a sort of yin and yang, capitalism and socialism, rather than being enemies to each other. There is actually a yin and yang. Traditionally they are enemies, but there's actually a kind of a symbiosis between them. Particularly as capitalism thinks that it's going to trickle down economics, that actually, if money's at the top, it's going to trickle down. We know that doesn't happen. It kind of, you see in the wine glass, it goes, this is what's supposed to happen in the pyramid of wine glasses. This is what actually happens. The wine glass at the top just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. There isn't a trickle down in capitalism. And that's the problem with the free market, is the money all gets evaporated upwards. And then there's no money amongst the people actually who like to spend money, and then all the companies collapse because they've got no one buying from them anymore. So you need something that brings the money down to the bottom. Anyway, that's kind of separate from this issue. But there's always the suggestion that actually capitalism is more individualistic and socialism treats everyone like the same. But in fact, free market forces means that you want efficiency, right? Henry Ford was not a socialist. Henry Ford was a capitalist who was thinking, how do I get as many cars as possible out? The more cars I can get out there, the better. So let's make them all the same, and let's put them on a conveyor belt, and let's make them all the same, and paint them all the same colour, and then rip them out, and then we can do it really, really cheaply, and then we can make lots of profit because everyone will a car, and they'll still go, that's a really good deal. Go, yeah, it is a really good deal, because it's so much cheaper than all the other car manufacturers. I'm still making a massive profit because I'm doing it in the most efficient way possible. Because capitalism pushes towards efficiency, efficiency does not push towards individuality. Efficiency pushes towards homogeneity. So it's not actually true that capitalism is more individualistic and socialism is more homogeneous. It is in its Stalinist manifestation. But actually, market forces can lead to a certain homogeneity, and I think in the case of something like this, yeah, you're going to go, well, we can cater to the bigger group. We can cater to the bigger group by giving them all the same thing, not customizing the care. The care is not customized because we are guided by a profit motive. I would say, yeah, I don't think the profit motive should be there in the criminal justice system. I'm going to agree with her, but I'm not going to agree just because women, or even just women and veterans. I think actually all criminals probably should be treated with a certain amount of individuality. They're not all the same. And I think that's my problem with feminism. It's kind of this, feminism kind of this socialism for women and fuck you capitalism for everyone else. So I've made a couple of jokes where I've gone, oh yeah, we should have longer prison sentences for women. Actually, there's massive inequalities there, that women get far shorter prison sentences than men. But actually, I'm not really in favour of long prison sentences in general. I do think that it's a big question. So it's been a big question in sociology circles and in psychology circles and social sciences generally, is what is prison for? And it is a good question. Is what is prison for? Or what is the criminal justice system for? Is it a deterrent so that people think twice about committing a crime because they know what's awaiting them? Is it preventative in terms of rehabilitating people in the community? Is it preventative in that it protects the community from those people who are dangerous? Or is it society's way of getting revenge on those that have wronged society? I would think that the last one is the one that would be dispensed straight away. I don't think revenge is a healthy human trait. I think it's a bit of toxic humanity there. The desire for revenge. I think the desire for revenge is toxic humanity. There you go. We've talked about toxic femininity, and we talked about toxic masculinity, and let's talk about toxic humanity. Desire for revenge is toxic humanity. Let's do away with it. So I'm going to dispense with that one straight away. I think some of it is preventative in terms of deterrent, but I do think rehabilitation should be an important part of it. I don't think we should be using prisons as dustbins to put those who have been broken by society, and I think we should, people who have been broken by society, we should repair them. I also think that we should try and reform society to make the tendency to be broken by it diminished. I just find that Vera's gynocentrism in just looking at how external social influences affect women in terms of abuse and coercion and mental health assumes that men are just innately bad. She doesn't ask those questions about men. I find that very disturbing. The thing is, this was just me a small feature of a video I was going to do on Vera Baird, but it's like turned out quite long. So this is going to be it. I'm just doing a standalone thing just on this speech of hers. I've got some other things that I've discovered about her. Quite scandalous. But yeah, she cares a lot about women and girls. She's talking about giving women special treatments and treating them like they're fallen innocents. Any woman that's guilty of a crime is a fallen innocent, and you must work out what could have happened to her. She's very Victorian in her way of thinking about women. I just want you to put this in perspective. This is the same woman who has produced these posters which talk about non-violent, I want to say non-violent because I always think of violence as physical violence, but of course feminists use violence to mean something else. Non-physical domestic violence. Non-physical domestic violence. Emotional violence. In which it portrayed all the perpetrators as being male. And she's also the one that gets really excited because more rapes being reported than ever, even though there's some coercion that goes on to getting girls to see themselves as rape victims. I've got more to tell you about her as well. But anyway, she's a crime commissioner for Northumberland, and she seems to be completely unaware that women have any wickedness in them at all. Women are pure. And I almost think that the eventual logical conclusion of her worldview is that you could probably cut female crime completely if you just remove men. If there were no men in the world, women would all be lovely because it's all our fault. I think that's her general view. It worries me that there is a woman with this outlook with so much power, and she admits how much power she has. She has power all the way through the criminal justice system. She's able to pull some strings and make influences, make sure that things are done to her liking. She has that outlook and that much power. Pity the men of Northumbria. Well, anyway, as you know, other opinions are available. This is just one blind man reporting on the nature of elephants. Cheerio.
Now, when we were in government, spun the law around quite substantially to stop guys getting off when they shouldn't and women being convicted when equally they shouldn't. So